Good day, everyone. My name is Rumbi Chakamba. I'm an associate editor here at Devex, and COP26 is well underway. Today, I'm joined by Adrián Martinez, the director for La Ruta del Clima from Costa Rica, to discuss how inclusive COP really is. Thank you, Adrián, for joining me.
Thank you, Rumbi. It's a pleasure to join and talk about the right of public participation at the climate conference.
Okay, so the UK has dubbed COP26 as the most inclusive COP ever. But in the lead up to the summit, to the conference itself, there were complaints that COP cannot be inclusive due to travel restrictions and that vulnerable countries may not actually be able to get their voice heard. Now that COP is underway, what do you think? Would we say that the UK has done enough to ensure that many people are actually able to attend COP26?
So that's a very interesting question. I think one of the issues that we have to take on account is, first of all, it is a hard condition, a hard situation in light of COVID-19. So that's something that we have to take on account. But also, it's not only about what is happening now, but what has happened in the past years and also in the recent months before COP26. It is not new, and we saw it in COP24 and COP25 of public participation being severely limited or disregarded by the UNFCCC Bureau and when they make decision makings about participation mechanisms. So now with COP26 is a new example of this sort of logic where public participation is addressed not as a human right, but something that may or may not be considered when the decisions are taken. And during the months before, what we saw is that first, we knew COP was a humongous challenge, especially for the global south. There is a huge inequality on access of vaccines, and that was something that we were very concerned. We were very concerned on the health issues, and what we experienced is either it could be go in two ways: either a systemic logic of discriminating people based on their origin that we saw with the issue of color coding, for example, that it became a huge issue before COP and then suddenly it disappeared, which makes us wonder what was the logic of hampering and discouraging participation based on colors of sort of this chart of COVID, and then simply that was no longer a matter. And then, for example, the issue of requiring a quarantine without being certain that you could have the funds to pay it, and then getting the support to pay it, and then eliminating the quarantine also was completely, and then at the same time, as that something being, I think that could be possible, leaving stranded many people without lodging because they counted on the 7 day quarantine to be at UK, and then not having the resources to pay for that, or having to change planes, or having to find funding. So is there has been a sequential series of events that either are a show of systemic structural inhibition of participation by the UK presidency, or a simply lack of context and understanding of what are the hurdles and obstacles and social and economic challenges that people and observers from the global south have to participate in a climate conference. And regularly, that implies lots of funding, lots of effort, lots of visa processes that are extremely stressful and that are not easy to go to any COP. And it's something that we know from the UNFCCC itself, that there is a significant imbalance of representation in terms of regional participations of civil society and even from parties. There is very the different amounts of people of representatives by region, either by parties or UNFCCC observers, varies drastically between the global south and the global north.
So you mentioned this a very confusing process. Like there were a lot of restrictions in the beginning. They were sort of taken care of, and in the end, it's like okay, it's now easier for you to go. But do you think this whole process discouraged people from going, and that we'll see less people from the global south actually attending COP26 at the end of this?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we have cases of people right now trying to board a plane, for example, a colleague from Haiti, and the airline simply just not, do not acknowledging that he has a right to go to COP, even though he fulfills all the requirements and having to wait 2 days just fighting with the airline to get on a plane. And that is like right now. And so even the issue is that even if the requirements of obstacles are lifted and were lifted eventually in this long process, the degree of uncertainty and this sort of back and forth of decision making without some sort of organization or pre-plan that can only lead you to think that people that were making the decision lack the context of how people in the global south have to go through barriers and requirements to move through international borders, especially in the context of COVID, or it is just a means to sort of reduce the amount of people from the global south participating. And in either way is very stressful and very important to acknowledge the situation, because having people from the global south also shifts the priorities in the agenda. Um, People in Africa, people in Southeast Asia, in the Pacific Islands, in Latin America have certain political expectations of COP26, and when you reduce the already traditionally a small percentage of people from these regions advocating and participating and supporting their delegation at COP26, that shifts the influence and generates undue influence by the already big presence of the global north within COP26, and that sort of end up guiding where COP26 will lead us in terms of results, and that is something that is very worrisome, that affects the right of political participation and affects the exercise and protection of the human right to a healthy environment.
Yeah, I think there was always this agreement that it's important for people from the global south to attend, but there was also a bit of disagreement on what should happen. Some civil society organizations called for the postponement of COP, while others said we need to go ahead, we need to have these discussions this year, and we need to have them in person, and the support should be granted. What do you think was the best way forward? The decision has been made, but what do you think was the best way forward? Should it have been postponed, or should we have just gone ahead with discussions?
Well, to be honest, many the networks that we support, there was an agreement of many NGOs about suspending, because clearly, as we can see, there is a huge risk of health, and the UK was unable to guarantee a safe and inclusive COP, and that is a fact. I mean, that is something that is undeniable. But on the other hand, coming from a Central American NGO to wait and still face the threat of climate impacts and loss and damage in our vulnerable communities sort of leave us also with no choice about which option to take. They're both awful. They're both risking lives. They are both destroying our community. And we urgently need climate negotiations to move forward. So, what we needed is a human based approach to COP26, one that takes on account not only our right to have a healthiest place, but also to guarantee. And the UK, as being part of the Aarhus Convention, and the other 71 countries that are also part to Access Rights Agreement, have pre-existing obligations in terms of human rights to guarantee and to establish um, and notify a mechanism of participation that ensures effective participation of civil society. So, what we expect, at least from our side, is just our rights are respected. We needed a COP that take into account the urgency of the climate emergency, but also our human right to be protected and to participate. And that is sort of what did not happen. So it's not an either or sort of situation where you can say one was the best. The thing is that it should have been done better, and it should have been done with a better contextual understanding and a little bit less of privilege in those that are making decisions, or understanding the realities of people across the globe. And in my understanding, that's either where the sort of analysis can end. Either it is a systemic tool of discrimination to reduce participation on the UK presidency, or simply a complete lack of understanding due to privilege and colonialism of what are the realities of people in the global south. So, I mean, you can have a pick. It's something I think there isn't an answer, but the fact is that participation has not been respected, and the degree of lack of facilities for people to be protected and not be crowded at the COP26 is also a fact. So it's sort of more a subjective opinion for me in which of those two are is closer to what is going on right now.
Yeah. And one thing you mentioned was the participation of civil society. They've also been concerns that civil society is not being allowed to observe negotiations now that the conference is underway. And there's also news that that has been addressed. Do you think enough is being done to allow civil society participation and they're being given enough access?
So participation on the first 2 days was completely non-existent. They took an approach of prioritizing the role of billionaires, the role of royalty, the role of presidents rather than the public, and on participating in not only on the high-level events, which are sort of for those people that hold power in the world, but also in the informal negotiations that took place during those events, and that we were completely excluded. Not only because the web platform failed, but because NGOs, for example, the constituencies were only allowed 4 spots to participate and enter the more than 2/3 of the venue that were closed those for those in power and leaving the public outside. So meaning that, for example, uh, the Climate Action Network, which is half of the environmental constituency, only had 2 spots for more than 1,500 NGOs that are members to participate in the informal discussions of negotiations that took place during those 2 days. And then in terms of being able to participate, it's still a challenge because we're 2 days late, and many of our observers, for example, at least from Latin America, are still just arriving because of challenges of cost and logistical arrangement. So it's been challenged to participate. It's something that now, at least that the venue has been freed from the closures that it had on the 2 days. We're trying to catch up and try to engage and into the process that has been developed without us since the beginning.
So we're now a few days into the conference, like you mentioned, and you spoke of this power imbalance that's been there for such a long time, and you spoke of systemic discrimination. What can civil society do to ensure that the voices are heard and that the voices of the people are actually heard within the short space of time that's left?
Well, I mean, that's something that for this COP and in future COPs, we have to remember that there are 72 parties of the UNFCCC that have in human rights obligations in terms of access rights. And they have an obligation to promote the right of public participation principles within the UNFCCC as well as in any other international forum. And that is something that should be done in terms of the organizing. And the UK had a human rights obligation based on the Aarhus Conventions to fulfill the Almaty guidelines in terms of guaranteeing participation within the COP. That is a failure that they have to own, and they have to reassess on how do they address public participation in their country and also in international forums. And for us, is from civil society, what we have to is engage from a rights perspective. It is our right to engage in the decision making, to influence it, not only to be there, to be part of the decision and have some say in and how it's taken and have our input duly considered. And that is sort of what is participating. And it's not just watching or having one seat amongst many. And also, I mean, just basic things. I mean, how could you have negotiations with 192 parties but only 144 seats? I mean, it's just a common sense sort of logistical arrangements that have to be taken into account. And also, you have hundreds of observers that should be part of those negotiations. And that's something that has to be changed. And we as NGOs have to demand our rights, and our right to a healthy environment and a right to public participation and environmental decision making is something that we should point out as a must have for any negotiations within the UNFCCC. And the secretariat of the UNFCCC has to still begin addressing public participation as a human right and not just like a token or interesting tool to improve governance, but as a right that the observers and that the public in general have.
So that is a fail on inclusivity for you. But in terms of COP26, what outcomes would you like to actually see come out of the conference? And do you think that's still possible without the participation that we wanted to see?
Well, it's always possible because it's people making decisions, and parties have obligations already to fulfill, either due to international law or due to the Paris Agreement or human rights. And what we expect, at least, it's a decision on Article 6, which is the core of the Paris Agreement in terms of mitigation, that duly takes on account human rights approach. But we also know and require a greater role and a permanent agenda on loss and damage within the UNFCCC. And for that, we need to establish funding and a systemic response on the climate impacts and the losses and damage that our vulnerable communities are having. That is not in the agenda, but that's a political ask that from civil society we require. Also, we have to understand that even though there's an agenda that is being officially led, there is also needs that the global south has is positioning within COP26. And for a successful COP, it's not only the agenda items that have to be successful, but that the COP26 and the parties have to acknowledge the need that people have in the territories and the communities, and having some sort of financial result in terms of loss and damage beyond the Santiago network, and what this is being developed there. It's something that is quite important for Global South NGOs.
Thank you so much for joining me, Adrian. We've actually unfortunately come to the end of our conversation, which was a really fascinating conversation. We will be looking out for those outcomes from COP, and we'll be looking out for more inclusivity in the following COPs to come. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.